Welcome to the video on graphing the tangent transformations. So the last video, what we went over was the parent function of tangents. This video, we're going to be going over kind of like how we did with sine and cosine, the transformations that happen. Similar to sine and cosine also, we're going to practice finding a, b, h, and k. Then we're going to find these kind of crucial parts to actually making the graph, and then we're going to practice actually making the graph itself. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, we're going to practice finding a, b, h, and k. This form looks very similar to the sine and cosine. The only difference is now you have a tangent. So you got a b that's in front of your x, and then an h that's inside with the x, and then a k, and then just remember that your h should be opposite. So this is just like the other ones that we've been over in the past. So go ahead and take a look at these ones. Feel free to pause the video, see if you can figure out what a, b, h, and k for each of these. I'm about to show the answer, so feel free, like I said, to try to work it out. All right, so here's the answer for 3 of them. First one, a is the number in front, so it's a 2. B is the number in front of x. There's a 1 there. H is a number inside the parentheses. There are no parentheses, so that must be a 0. Plus 7 must be your k value because that's the part that's kind of away from x. Otherwise, it would be parentheses. Okay, so that 7 is a k, not an h. This one over here, your a is a 5. B is the number in front of x, so that's a 3. The number inside the parentheses is a -2. You got to switch the sign though to a positive, and then your k is that plus 4. Bottom one, a is a 1 because there's a 1 here. Number in front of x is a 1. H is inside the parentheses, so this is pi over 3, so it's a negative pi over 3. And then your k is a 0 because there's nothing being added on. Now this last one's a little bit different because if you notice our general form up here, there is no number. If you have parentheses, you should not have a number in front of x because if there is one, you should pull it out in front if you have an h value, okay? So right now I have parentheses, which means that I should not have this 3 in front of my x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a 3 off of each of these, kind of like we did with sine and cosine. This gets kind of complicated for some people. Other people want to pick up on what to do. Basically, you're dividing by 3. So if I pull a 3 out, you got to divide both of these things by 3. Or another way to think about it is like you're multiplying it by 1/3. Because when you pull a 3 out, dividing by 3 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/3. So if I take 1/3 of 3, I get just an x. If I take 1/3 of pi over 2, I get pi over 6 because 1/3 times pi over 2 is pi over 6. All right, so it's the same thing as pulling a 3 out. You can double check that by multiplying in. 3 times x is a 3x. 3 times pi over 6 is 3 pi over 6, which simplifies down to pi over 2. So these two things are the same thing. But like I said, if you have parentheses and you got this number kind of inside next to the x, you got to pull it out, okay? And then this is your a, b, h, and k, now that we have it in the right form. And basically that's the first part, because the next part is we're going to find the crucial parts of the graph itself. Without figuring out a, b, h, and k, that's going to be very difficult. So that's why I wanted to practice this. Now, the next part is we're going to find the amplitude. I put quotes around it because it's not an actual amplitude, and I'll show you why. Period is the time it takes to finish one cycle. The intervals, the things that we're going to mark off our x-axis with. And then any left, right, up, or down shifts, that's your h and k. And then we're going to work with the pattern, so it makes it easier for you to graph. All right, so we're not going to graph yet. We're just going to find these pieces. So again, that's your general form. So the amplitude, you're going to get that by, and I'm going to call it the fake amplitude because it's not the real amplitude. But our fake amplitude is the same thing it's been for sine and cosine. It's just that a value in front. So that's pretty simple to figure out. Your period, it used to be 2 pi over b because it took about 2 pi for your parent graph to finish off with sine and cosine. Turns out tangent finishes in basically half the time. So it's just going to be pi over b. So it's a slight difference. Make sure that you take note of that. Don't treat this like sine and cosine. It's a little different. It's not 2 pi. It's just pi over b. Interval, you find the same way. Just like with sine and cosine, when you split it into 4 pieces, same thing here. You're going to do 1/4 times your period. Phase shift, also known as your horizontal shift, is just your h value. That's a left and right shift. Vertical shift up and down is just your k. And then your pattern, I got to shift this stuff over a little bit just because I need some room here. Your pattern works a little bit different too. So sine and cosine versus tangent, the period's a little bit different and the pattern's a little bit different. The pattern for Sine and cosine, you started at 0, and then you worked your way over to the right. This one, tangent kind of lives around 0, both to the positive side and the negative side. So what the way I'm gonna teach you, and other teachers teach this differently, but this is just the way I teach it. Feel free to use whatever method works best for you. I teach you to work from the middle and then work your way out, okay? So the middle is gonna be the center point. Then when you go to the right, you're gonna go up 1. This is what we did for the parent function. We started at the center, then we went up 1 when we went to the right, we went down 1 when we went to the left, and then we threw our asymptotes on the side. Now, when there's shifting involved and some transformations, it's not just not up 1 and down 1. There's a reason why it was up 1 and down 1. Your center is actually going to be H and K, because usually you're at 0, 0. But if you have a shift left or right or a shift up or down, that's going to be your new center. So if I had a shift right 5 and up 7, it'd be 5 comma 7 would be where you start. Kind of like what we did for parabolas when we found the vertex and the H and K values moved it around. It's kind of like that. So our center point starts at 0, 0, but the H and K values are going to be our actual center of our, or quote unquote center, of our tangent graph. Now, when we went up and down 1, that actually has to do with your amplitude. So you're actually going to, when you go to the right, you're going to add A. When you go to the left, you're going to subtract A. So if A is a 5, then you're going to go up 5 from your center. If it's, and then you go down 5 from your center when you go from the left. And again, I'll be doing this when we do the actual graph. This is just kind of giving you a heads up what's going to happen. And then as you move out, you go to your asymptote. So just kind of fixing this up. So HK is your center. Subtract A going to the left, add A to it when you're going to the right. Let's talk about the Y values. And that's your pattern. So let's try this with an actual equation. So again, the first step is to find A, B, H, and K. So A is 3, B is 2, H is 0 because there's no parentheses, and then K is at plus 5. All right, so if I want to find my fake amplitude, that's a 3. Period is going to be pi over B, which is 2, so pi over 2. Does not simplify, so leave it alone. So I'm going to take 1/4 of my period, so 1/4 times pi over 2. So 1/4 times my period, which is pi over 2. 1 times pi is pi. 4 times 2 is 8, so that's pi over 8. Horizontal shift is just your H, so that's going to be 0. Vertical shift is just your K, so that's your 5. And then now I can start filling in my pattern, because once I find all these pieces, that's when I can start actually graphing this thing. So my pattern is I start off with HK, so it's going to be 0, comma 5. Then from there, as I move to the right 1 interval, so as I move to the right 1, I'm going to add A. So I'm going to go up, the amplitude's 3, so I'm going to go up by 3, and then I'm going to go down by 3. So technically, if I wanted to kind of look at this, my Y value is 5, but then I went up 3, so it's going to be going up to 8. And then my Y value here was 5, but then I go down 3, so it's going to be down to 2. Okay, it makes a lot more sense when you see it on the actual graph. Just know that you add 3 and subtract 3, and then you throw your asymptotes on there. Okay, let's try it on this one. Go ahead and feel free to try to figure this one out. Okay, so A should have been a 4, B should have been a 1, H is the opposite, so it's negative pi over 2, and K stays the same. It's just a negative 6. And then now you just start filling in all these pieces. Now, if you're taking notes on this, you can either print this page up because we don't have to take notes the regular way, or you can take a picture of it, or you can write it down on a piece of paper, whichever way that you find best to memorize this stuff, okay? So your fake amplitude is just A, so it's just a 4. Period is pi over B, so that's pi over 1. 1/4 of your period. So 1/4, well, pi over 1 is pi, by the way. 1/4 of pi. It's basically going to be top times top. So pi times 1 is pi. So it's going to be pi over 4. Horizontal shift is just going to copy down your HK, and then your K value is going to be negative 6. Pattern again is H and then K. So negative pi over 2, negative 6. Then you're going to add your A and subtract your A. Your A value was this 4, the amplitude. So it's going to be adding 4 and subtracting 4. If you look at your Y value, adding 4 to that be a negative 2, subtracting 4 to be a negative 10. And then your asymptotes will be the next interval out. Okay. All right. So basically, this part right here is going to be the piece where we're going to build our graph from. So let's go ahead and put them all together and actually start graphing this stuff. So I'm going to bring this stuff up here just for a quick reference guide. Like I said, if you print it up or take a snapshot, It's just a nice little quick note card. By the way, your next test is an open notes test. So yeah, just a little hint. Take good notes. So first example of making your own graph, y equals 2 tan 4x plus 3. Now, we have a 4 in front of the x. We do not have to factor it out. There are no parentheses here. So that's not an h value. This is a k value. So it's not like I have to pull a 4 out and then pull it off of here too, because there's no parentheses going on, okay? So your a is a 2, your b is a 4, your h is 0 because there's no parentheses here, and then your k is a 3. So we're going to find our fake amplitude, our period, interval, phase shift, also known as horizontal shift and vertical shift, and then build our pattern. So our amplitude is 2. Period is pi over b, so it's pi over 4. It doesn't simplify, it still doesn't stay the same. 1/4 of pi over 4, 1 times pi is pi, 4 times 4 is 16. Phase shift is just my h, which is 0. Vertical shift is just my k, which is 3. Now we're going to start our pattern. Our pattern starts in the center. Our center is h comma k. If you forget which order that goes in, just go alphabetical order, because h comes before k. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Yep. H comes before k. So you got 0 comma 3. That's where you're going to start. Put your first point there. And then we're going to work our way out. We're going to add and subtract, add to the right, subtract to the left. That value 2 is the number that we will be adding and subtracting. That comes directly from your amplitude, or your a value means the same thing. And then you're going to throw your asymptotes on there. Now, your questions will ask you for the equation of an asymptote. That's going to be a vertical line, so it's going to say x equals. And I'll show you how to find that right now. So first thing we need to do is mark our graph, because I need to make sure that you know what intervals you're counting by. So if you look at your intervals, it's pi over 16. Now, just like we did before, we're just going to start with 1 pi over 16. So starting here, 1 pi over 16, then moving on to 2 pi over 16, then 3 pi over 16, then 4 pi over 16. So you're just counting up by 1 each time. And then you simplify. 1 over 16 is just pi over 16. 2 over 16, that's going to be pi over 8. 3 over 16 does not simplify. 4 pi over 16 simplifies to 1/4, so pi over 4. So let's go ahead and do that. And that simplifies to those. Now, like I said, tangent kind of straddles the origin, so you need to go in the negative direction as well. Once you simplify these guys over here, just put the negative values to the left. So it's going to be negative pi over 16, negative pi over 8, negative 3 pi over 16, and negative pi over 4. Your y-axis is pretty easy. You just count by regular ones. Count by 2s if it goes up pretty far on your amplitude. If this amplitude is like a 20, you're not going to be able to fit like going up 20 on here, because you're adding 20, subtracting 20. We're just adding 2 though. So, all right. So now that we have our graph all marked off, let's go ahead and start graphing. So your center is at 0, 3. So first point is going to be at, oh, where'd it go? Oh, there it goes. Whoops. I went too fast. So first point's at 0, 3 right here, because that's our center. And now if you remember the general shape, you should be able to start visualizing what this thing's going to look like, okay? When I go to the right, I'm going to go up to. So starting from here, when I go to the right, I'm going to go up to, so you're going to have a point right here. As I go to the left one interval, I'm going to go down to. So that's going to be right here, okay? So we're going to add 2 and subtract 2 as we go from the left and right. Okay, so right goes up 2, left goes down 2, starting from my center. Okay, so I go over one interval, go up 2, go over one interval to the left, go down 2. And you should get this triple dot. These 3 dots are always going to be kind of linear. They can make a straight line, but when you connect them, please don't connect them with a straight line. It's a curve, looks kind of like a cubic. Now, as you go out one more time, so one more interval out this way, one more interval out this way, that's where we place our asymptotes, okay? Your graph will basically always look like this for the most part. Your intervals are the things that are going to be changing, all right? So this is basically it. You need to tell me what the asymptotes are, though. So if you look at your asymptotes, this is a negative pi over 8. So this is x equals negative pi over 8 is this line right here. X equals positive pi over 8, because that's pi over 8 right here behind here. And those are your 2 asymptotes. So your first 2, though. Remember, this is a periodic function, so it keeps repeating itself, but at least those are the first two that we're talking about. Okay, now you just connect it. Like I said, connect it kind of like it's a cubic function that's stuck between these two things. And that's it. You're done, right? The rest of this video is just going to have a couple more examples. If you feel like you need them, feel free to use them. If not, try out the homework. And if you feel like you're going kind of awry, then come back and watch the video some more. All right, so this one's going to have some shifting going on. Again, A, B is a number in front of X, that's a 1. H is a in parentheses, so negative pi over 4, because you got to switch your sign. And K is 0. Forgot to say, like, if you want, feel free to try this one on your own before I go over it and see if you can get it. Okay. A, B, H, K. So A is 3, B is pi over B. I'm sorry, period is pi over B. So pi over 1, which is just pi. Your interval is going to be 1/4 of your period. So take your pi, multiply it by 1/4. Top times top, that's pi over 4. All right. These two are pretty simple. That's just H and K. Okay, so let's just throw in H and K there. And then now we start our pattern. Start at the center. Center is H comma K, so negative pi over 4 comma 0. Work your way out. You're going to add or subtract your amplitude, your fake amplitude, and then go to your asymptotes, right? So let's go ahead and start building this thing. Now, keep in mind, you don't really have to go out more than maybe like 4 or 5, just depending on how it's shifting around. The main thing you want to look at here is your amplitude. If you got 3, you know that you're going to be going up a little ways, so maybe put a few more marks in there, okay? You can always add more stuff too, just draw your line a little bit longer. All right, so your interval is pi over 4. So you're going to start 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, and then 5 pi over 4, and then simplify, okay? And now just do the negative on this side, all right? So negative whatever this side, just make negative on that side, and then put all your y values in, and then start graphing. So negative pi over 4 comma 0. So that's right here, negative pi over 4 or 0. Right, so right here is where you're going to start. And again, you can kind of visualize what's going on. So you're going to add 3 as you go to the right. You're going to subtract 3 as you go to the left. So as you go to the right, one interval, go up 3. As you go to the left, one interval, go down 3. And you got your triple dots, all right? And then you're going to go out one more time to your asymptotes. So go out again to one more on the left and the right, and then throw your lines in. And there you go, triple dots, double lines. You got your framework kind of going there. Now, just a quick comment. The reason why I'm calling this a fake amplitude is because amplitude is technically, with sine and cosine, that's how the highest that you can go and the lowest you can go. But the thing is since this thing keeps going up, it actually doesn't have a maximum. And this thing keeps going down, it does not have a minimum because it keeps going. So this, I call it a fake amplitude because it just gives you really the next point that you have to get to kind of know the pattern. But it's not a real amplitude. So that's why I call it a fake one. Fakey. So now we do the equations of these lines. So x equals pi over 4 for the right asymptote. The left asymptote, that was negative 3 pi over 4. So if the question asks you for the asymptotes, that's how you would find those. You just look at where your asymptotes go through, put x equals. Okay, now you draw your cubic looking kind of function. Okay, curves up, curves down, and that's it. All right. Another example, and I think this is the last example. So last example, this one is one of the ones that's kind of funky because we got this 4 right here. So remember, you're going to you don't want a 4 here, so it's like you're dividing a 4 out. So you're going to pull the 4 out, you're going to put a 4 here, and then just multiply both of these by 1/4. It's the same thing as dividing by 4. So dividing by 4 here, that gets rid of the 4, multiplying by 1/4. When I say multiply 1/4, it helps with this fraction, because if you do pi over 2 times 1/4, that gets pi over 8. That's the same thing as dividing by 4. Pi over 2 divided by 4 is pi over 8. So pull a 4 out, you get your x by itself, pi over 8 right there. And there you go, all right? One of your test problems will be similar to this, just to give you a heads up. So make sure you're able to pull that thing out, all right? So A is a 1, B is a 4, H is a negative pi over 8, and K is a 0. Amplitude is 1, and again, pause the video, go ahead and try this on your own. If you think you can handle it. If not, work along with me. That's why I'm here. Pi over 4, pi over b, b is 4, so pi over 4 does not simplify. Interval goes 1/4 of your period. 1 times pi is just pi. 4 times 4 is 16. So pi over 16 is what we're going to count by. That's going to be 1 pi over 16, 2 pi over 16, 3 pi over 16, all that stuff. Phase shift, also known as horizontal shift, is negative pi over 8. That means it got moved left pi over 8. K is 0, so it did not move up or down. That's just going to stay kind of flat there. Okay, center is negative pi over 8, comma 0. You're going to add and subtract 1 from there, and then throw your asymptotes on. Okay, so 1 pi over 16. Your interval is how you mark your x-axis again. I like to count it out like this. Now, if you get good with this, you don't have to write this out first and then simplify. You can just kind of do it in your head. 1 pi over 16 is just pi over 16. That's going to be pi over 8, 3 pi over 16, pi over 4, 5 pi over 16. It's going to be basically every other one's the ones that you can simplify. So it goes like that. Take your negative side, put your y values in, and then start plotting. So your center's at negative pi over 8, 0. So that's over here, right? And then now you're going to do your triple dots. So as you go to the right, you're going to go up 1, left, down 1. And just a heads up real quick while we're at this point right here, if this a was a negative value, you would add a -1 here, you would subtract a -1 here. Basically what happens is instead of going up 1 here, you're going to go down 1, and this one instead of going down 1, it's just going to invert everything. So your graph's going to be going the other way, just like how we did with other graphs. I didn't put an example of that one because I didn't want the video to be too long. Too late. Then you go to the asymptotes. So add 1, subtract 1, go to your asymptotes, and throw those in the next intervals. And there you go, triple dots with the 2 bars on the outside. And again, if it was a negative, your 2 dots would end up being basically inverted, and you'd have an upside down kind of tangent looking thing. Right, so your equations is x equals negative pi over 4, x equals 0. Throw those on your asymptotes, and then draw your cubic E looking function. It's not really a cubic, but cubic-ish kind of thing. And that's it, okay? So that's how you do that. Now, this is the last video for this unit. So next week, we are going to be coming up on a test. This week, we only had really 2 things to go over. Just make sure you're ready for that stuff, okay? Feel free to stop by during my office hours if you have any questions. Otherwise, I hope you guys are taking care and having not too hard of a time adjusting to all this. All right, take care. Bye-bye.